Welcome to the show. And I'd like to begin with a small anecdote of me meeting my great aunt in Kapoor Mahal, which is on Marine Drive, on a winter afternoon in Bombay. She had a small flat on the ground floor, and I was sitting and chatting with her. And she served me kamrak, a star fruit sharbat, which was not only homemade but homegrown on Marine Drive. And I was very surprised where she had a little garden hidden away somewhere. And she started growing fruits and vegetables in the chalk or the courtyard of the building. So all these buildings actually in Marine Drive have these chalks which you could really use in different ways. And then we were just sitting on the porch of her ground floor flat, and she started talking about the good old days when Nehru would drive an open car, wave to the residents of a new India and so on. And that got me thinking of this whole time of Marine Drive being built in Bombay, the whole idea of Art Deco. My grandparents lived in an Art Deco home with colored terrazzo tiles, circular pillars that would run around as a child and so on. And then I chanced upon this little piece that Rushdie had written about Art Deco, where he calls it the Bombay style, where you can, and Mustansir I think very eloquently put it, if you close your eyes and you think of one style, which is the Bombay style, it's really Art Deco. Many shows have been done on the architecture aspect of Art Deco, but from an object or a domestic point of view, it's not been really, surprisingly, there's no show done as far as I know in India. And I thought that's a gap worth kind of considering filling. So when Srila gave me a carte blanche to do a show in Bombay, in Kotachiwadi, I said, let's do something with Art Deco. I was also very clear that I didn't want to do the Marine Drive and the Oval, which is the more obvious sort of Art Deco imagery that all of us have in across the world when it comes to Bombay Deco. So I started looking at the suburbs, central Bombay and so on, and Kotachiwadi, and I said, how does Kotachiwadi respond to Art Deco? And I realized the two houses away there is Caesar Mansion, which is an Art Deco building, Sansgiri Southern, which is right at the corner, and slowly all these Hindu Sabhagras, etc. in Girgaon had at least what I would call a nod to Art Deco, if not in all its glory. And so this show really is about taking the gaze away from the Oval and Marine Drive to other parts of Bombay. That's one aspect of the show. The other aspect is looking at practicing designers, artists and architects. What do they think of Art Deco today? Is it inspiring enough for them to respond to it? So I dipped into existing bodies of work, as well as conversations and commissions specifically for this show. And a lot of interesting things came out. I learned a lot while I was doing this. So I'm just going to take bits and pieces of the show and start talking about that, and we can do questions after that if any. You guys were all there at SR House, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But again, this is the motive of movement, leaping, moving forward, a dolphin, maritime, holding something which is what I call hope. So it's very Bombay Art Deco in that sense. This is a reproduction. There are old pieces, there are reproductions of furniture from Camelot, Mahendra Doshi. And I have kind of sneakily slipped in reproductions, or I've sneaked in originals between reproductions for a very simple reason. I'm not taking the higher ground that everything needs to be original, whatever that is. Because I think we need to be patrons to making these objects even today. That's very important. So the craft sustains, restoration skills sustain, and the fact that these reproductions have patrons is a testimony to the popularity of the style. So that's the point I was wishing to make by inserting, because there's no dearth of old Art Deco furniture or objects. It was very important for me to make this point in this show. Jamdani fashion, hand drawn and hand painted using indigo and alta, which is the red. This is Bombay balcony, and it's kind of getting the balustrades, the balcony grills, etc. interwoven with the Jamdani, which I will later connect to actual Jamdani textiles later. Over here are the mirrors by Ranji, who is a Goa-based dealer. I mean, this is essentially a miniaturized build rather than chopping a mirror. I think Tanya it says Suthar Nandalal Atmaram Tarafti Saprem Bhet. So it is carpenter Nandalal Atmaram has gifted this to either a friend or a patron or a client, this little Art Deco mirror. Now, you may not be the Maharaja of Morbi, you may not be the Holkars of Indore, you may not be the Maharaja of Jodhpur, but it was so compelling that even a carpenter could not resist making a mirror in Art Deco style. And since it's a gift, he had the autonomy to choose a style and detailing, and he still picked Art Deco. So that as a detail tells us it was a very egalitarian style. It was for everybody. It wasn't elitist, it wasn't just Marine Drive and the Oval. It was Bhaikala, and it was Kandivali, and it was Juhu, and so on. Akshay specifically, specially checked into the Sea Green Hotel, which was Tantra showed today in his lecture on Marine Drive. And he checked in as a journalist. He did not say he was documenting the hotel. He checked in with a typewriter. This was one Art Deco space in a certain time in the chronology of things. He's talking in these letters about walking barefoot onto the balcony with the AC dripping. It's really capturing a certain moment in time, really, an Art Deco experience, questioning the relevance of these buildings and what their future will be. So this cinema, the jazz age in Indian cinema, Liberty, Metro, Regal, and so on. And I'd urge you to think back about movies set in maybe the 50s and 60s and 70s. You would always, no, not so much furniture, I'm actually more interested in the idea of Art Deco. Who were the people who lived in Art Deco homes initially? It was the vamp, it was the villain, it was a casino, it was the villain's den, it was a nightclub, because it was a modern style, it was a new style, it was racy, it was forbidden. What we now find old-fashioned and so on was actually considered very avant-garde and not acceptable. So that's again something that studios like this, which cater to recreating the time period, that's why they are here in this show, to kind of... Jane, there's a stool there if you like. Yeah. Favorites, this is a piece by the Atelier Chipi Vara, which is a Delhi-based studio. And their workshop where this was made is in rural Uttar Pradesh. The studio is held by Tanveen Rati. And what this is it's marquetry. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. These are pieces of wood, all natural woods. There is no staining, no color added. It's just a clear varnish on top of it. It's like a jigsaw puzzle, hand cut in a village in Uttar Pradesh. If you look carefully, these are the movement of the feathers, everything. It's very finely articulated. It's about flight, hope, sunrise, and so on. But I want to tell you a little bit about how this piece came about. This was commissioned for the project. I found a tiny black and white photograph about this size. I didn't have copyright to put it in the show, unfortunately, from the Taj Hotel's archives, of a room called the Prince's Chamber from the 1920s and 30s, where the princes, Nawab, Nizams would come and meet in Bombay, in Kolaba at the Taj Hotel, and talk about the future of their kingdoms vis-a-vis the idea of the nation being formed. And the backdrop of it was this wallpaper by the same architect, interior designer commissioned to do Manik Bagh for the workers, and that had these cranes or swans in flight. So I spoke to Tanveen and said, can you take that as inspiration and do something? So Tanveen started doing these Deco swans, very, very French, very European, and she composed this whole sort of idea, and I said, well, this is still kind of being in the 1920s. If it's 2020, can we do something Bombay? Can we do flamingos instead of swans and cranes, which is very savory, and again taking the focus away from South Bombay, which I want to do with this show. So she's got an Art Deco abstraction of the mud flats of Sivri, the wonderful pollution of Bombay, the clouds, and this really is the kind of collaboration and the kind of patronage we need for a craft like this in an Art Deco style to keep marquetry alive. And this is a luxury craft, this is not everybody's cup of tea. So we need patrons to not look at machine-made European objects as objects of luxury, but something as bespoke and as beautiful as this. So this is again a very special part of the show.
Sorry, is that a naughty title for it?
Disclaimer, I'm not a textile expert, I know very little about textiles. These are jamdanis and woven in Bengal. The suggestion I wish to make is that these motifs have seeped into various weaving centers across the country. I met a lady this morning, she's right here, with a ziggurat in her pallu. And so these motifs became a part of the architecture and interior design vocabulary. They were part of our visual vocabulary. They obviously had to seep in somewhere, perhaps in this. And these are not all traditional motifs. What happens at the beginning of this millennium, the Japanese buyers come into Bengal and they want simplified, austere, sort of minimal ornamentation jamdani. So the repertoire to pick out of, or the sort of visual direction to pick out of, is the grills or the jalas, and that's what the weavers also say. These are from jalis, from homes in Calcutta. So the love for the loom, that's the same thing. And in fact, they have these very Art Deco little buttis floating around. James has taken exotic India, the peacock feather, but the Japanese obsession of the exotic in Art Deco as kimonos, and created boxer shorts of this commission for the project, which is all mad take, you know, it's camp, it's decadent, it's glamorous, it's quite Art Deco, James.
Look at temple body, huh?
Yeah, as they are. 50s, because of Corbusier and Nehru's interest in modernism, that Art Deco starts becoming simpler because the taste becomes more modernist, and then it dies out. It's not like it you can all just...
Please come.
So to my right here, works by contemporary artist Vishwa Shroff. Incidentally, she lives in a very beautifully restored Art Deco flat in Kolaba. But these drawings are not of that, these are of Queen's Court. And Vishwa and her husband Katsushi Goto are doing an incredible study on kitchens and dining spaces in Art Deco homes. I don't know anybody else in the world doing this sort of thing. So it's quite interesting. And Vishwas, these are all hand-drafted, hand-drawn, hand-painted to the level of detail where if this particular tile in this foyer in Queen's Court is darker than that one, then she's painted that particular one in that shade. It's meticulous, but it's not just about the skill. She's also talking about these spines or corridors in Art Deco homes which we don't have in newer homes anymore. These pause points and these spines which connect one space to another. Their research is also leading them to talk about the idea of the zenana and mardana, where the sort of quarters which were considered the feminine domain, the kitchen or the boudoir, etc. were one end. The women were able to engage through certain doors in those passages without having to or wanting to, being allowed to engage with the mardana quarters or the public areas and so on. And the dynamic and the sort of social feminist idea of their place in an Art Deco home. So it's quite interesting even from a sort of socio-political angle if you look at these works. This is again, you know, this is Deco of London. This is all hand painted. Again, this has a conversation with Tanveen's flamingos flying across the sun. Again, interpreted in an Art Deco fashion, but in a different medium. So the idea was also to do similar things in different media to show the possibilities of Art Deco today. Again, this is James's take on, these are all commissioned for the project, for this show, with metallic beadwork. He's trying to evoke a certain era and mood. I want to draw your attention to this one on top especially. This particular work, now this motif, I've juxtaposed it with this light. This is sort of a Japanese fan, it is a sunburst, you see it in Hashim's school photograph, what I was talking about. So across the motif travels. I mean, this is something that James took inspiration and did. This is an old piece, the building Hashim documents is old. So these are sort of dots we need to join to kind of train our eye to see Art Deco, if one were to. This is again very special. This was commissioned for this show. This is Deco of London, and these are ultra luxury wall coverings. hand embroidered in their atelier in Calcutta. If you remember, I was talking about the wallpaper which came from Europe to Manik Bagh and to the Taj Hotel. Here, this is being made in India. This sits at the sort of cusp of Art Nouveau and Art Deco, and this is sent all across the world. So there is that sort of reversal of patrons wanting this across the world, even though it's Art Deco which came from the West and so on. So that kind of reverse movement of luxury items also becomes interesting to talk about in this show. This is a trophy. The reason this is in the show is so this is not Art Deco and this is. So the idea is that a pedestal, this base is very sort of automobile. You can look at wheels and that sort of chrome detail, etc. So how compelling was it to bring Art Deco even a slightly older style? I keep using the word compelling because that really was what everyone wanted, a piece of deco. Whether it's a little mirror that a carpenter wanted or the base of this. So if you can't build a home, you'll buy a tipoy. Somebody asked me the other day, what can we do? You know, at the end of the shit, I said, buy a piece of like a coffee table or a peg table and restore it and keep it and celebrate that. I mean, as citizens, if we talk about Art Deco and celebrate it in small ways is perhaps a good way to kind of get this conversation going. I'm not entirely sure if Hema touched upon Bharat tiles and the buildings. Did she? No.
No.
So in here, these are drawings of buildings on the Oval Maidan. This is a project that Mustansir did with his students at Sir J.J. College of Architecture. And I've had some thrills composing them in a ziggurat, but they're obviously all along one line by the Oval. Now, the reason I've put them in, even though I keep saying we take the focus away from South Bombay and the Oval, is that this needs to be a case study for other colleges, other students and other practicing architects to kind of adopt their neighborhoods and other buildings which are in disrepair compared to the Oval and Marine Drive. And that's the way to kind of, documentation is the first step for conservation. Documentation leads to awareness, and then we make a judicious choice whether there is merit in conserving or is it just sheer romance. If the FSI, if the real estate pressure does not allow it, you don't break brownstones in New York just because New York has a huge load, right? So these are the kind of questions I'm trying to raise, bringing this in. Bharat Tiles is a century-old company doing fantastic work in Bombay, and I want to bring in a bit of interior design and architecture, which I specialize in. It's really my bread and butter. Why did colored terrazzo become such a Bombay Art Deco thing? So if you look at Bombay back in the day, it wasn't like this where we had glass buildings. We wanted to create a bit of darkness, the glaring sun. You want respite from that. So you wanted a darker floor. You want recessed balconies so you don't get the glare of the sun. You wanted your house to be cooler because not everyone could afford air conditioning. Darker flooring. It's a tropical climate. We have a monsoon. Stains, other marks are seen lesser on these patterned darker floorings. A single strand on vitrified tile or Italian marble is seen. So these were far more forgiving and far more giving as floorings. The other thing to think about these sort of multicolored floorings was, being a tropical country, carpets did not make sense in Bombay, but you still wanted some pattern and figuration on the floor. So these became a sort of design in lieu of a carpet. So these are all well thought of ideas which we have rejected over time, and sort of but it's also aspirational what we're doing now, rejecting this and looking at something else. But these are questions we need to kind of ask of ourselves and what forms our taste. So that's another point where Bharat Tiles is here. I'm going to keep talking about Hema's wonderful tapestry, and we'll move to the last room here. The room's a bit small, so I'd urge you to kind of, once I finish describing it, people can take turns and see it. Srila and Pavitra both showed Hanuj Singh's jewelry. Now here I wanted to talk about the old pieces are available in all the museums to look at, in all catalogs, and it's very easy for anyone to browse the internet. So I decided not to go for the old Art Deco pieces of jewelry, but to look at a practitioner who, and Hanuj is from the Kapurthala, erstwhile royal family of Kapurthala. he has access to archives and collections, but he has not reproduced those pieces of jewelry. What he's done is he has interpreted them in a more contemporary way. They're stylized Art Deco or Neo-Deco, for want of a better term, but the sense of proportion, the way they dangle, the play of movement, again, is exquisite. And this is, again, very precious. The dangles of the ears of Madonna and Beyonce and Judi Dench and who not. But, and this is very, very fine jewelry. It mixes precious, semi-precious and not so precious materials, which is the high point of Art Deco. They can be bakelite and they can be sort of not precious stone in the same piece of jewelry. While these are high-end luxury pieces, and this is Art Deco, this is also Art Deco, which is Muhammad Ali Road again, where one balcony has been converted into a chicken coop for one, and this is, this is fantastic. And a rosette has fallen off on a chhajja. I mean, these are sort of, it's an allegory for what is happening to our built and unbuilt heritage in this city, which I think, and neither is more important than the other, but both are realities. Art Deco is for the elite, Art Deco is for the not elite, and also the idea of putting something unexpected like this in a boudoir setting. I had some fun with exhibition design in this show as well, where we've recreated, this is an old dresser, the idea of shringar or sitting and getting dressed, which was a very 1920s, 30s, 40s, 60s. I don't think most people have the time anymore to sort of pause, appreciate the curvature of that, this wonderful bottle and things like that. I mean, running your finger over something. It's also the idea of living an Art Deco life, which I wanted to recreate with this carpet, the hanging light and so on, to evoke a certain mood without it being too thematic. The idea was to, because not everybody has the luxury of living in an Art Deco home or perhaps even visiting one, but this was my little attempt to kind of bring in a little sort of scale. The gallery allowed for this sort of scale to have an intimate Art Deco living experience. And the last thing I want to talk about, which I have the most fun doing, is the point that it makes is that Art Deco beyond South Bombay is right under your nose and right under my nose, if only we care to look, and that's what you see as the skirting. There is Matunga, and there is Kandivali, and there is Khar, and there is Girgaon and Kotachipadi. If only we care to look, and if we consider it as precious as some other Art Deco buildings. Thank you.
Thank you so much.